100 yards and a touchdown that would easily pay off the 5K. The guy that kind of took a step back with everyone else getting healthy was DeAndre Moore. We saw the couple of explosive games from him against Mississippi State and then again against Vandy. Didn't really see it from him in this last one against Florida. Don't expect him to be a huge part of the offense here. And Matthew Golden, only 3 catches, but 2 of them for touchdowns. His catches tend to be long catches, averaging 15 yards reception on the year. And the 2 I mentioned before, Gunnar Helm, kind of that consistent 3 to 5 catch. Maybe he gets a touchdown, maybe he doesn't, but he's damn near been priced 3,100. So as a last piece to fill out your build and hope for maybe a second touchdown to vault him up the rankings. He is interesting. Have not seen a ton from Ryan Wingo. He's been kind of a beat up on the non-con type of player so far and hasn't done a whole lot in conference play. That's okay. They have enough other guys that are catching the football. And we'll maybe see him next year a little bit more. So really focused on Bond and Golden to a lesser degree, and then Helm as kind of a last piece in to really derive some value as paired with Ewers. Arkansas side, ballsy if you can get there. Taylon Green, we've seen him, have some decent games, not always against good competition. He's more of a beat up on weaker defenses kind of quarterback. But anything can happen. Home game means a lot to Arkansas, protect their home field, all that. Probably not getting to Taylon Green at 8,200. It would be an interesting thing to do in a game stack, I suppose, but not going to get there myself. Jaquindon Jackson probably back from injury for this one at 7,200. That's a tough sell as well. They may try to pound the rock on the ground and take the wind out of the sails of the Texas offense. But he's going to need a lot of volume and more efficiency than I think he'll get for that 7,200 to be paid off. And there's other places to go at running back that we'll get to. The piece that does make a little bit of sense because he's not going to be as subjected to the turnovers that might come along with Taylon Green is Andrew Armstrong. Anytime you have a receiver at home chasing a bunch of points and he is already the alpha and the first read for his quarterback on most plays, and the second read for the quarterback is running the ball, you end up getting a lot of volume to that receiver. And so Andrew Armstrong is very much that guy for Taylon Green. At 6,900, he's a little pricey, but home dog and a game that I think stays moderately competitive, very much usable as the run back if you are using Ewers and one of his pass catchers. If you want to go that route. The other guys are going to be very low volume flyers. Isaiah Satania has some wiggle and some shake, but we haven't seen him get a lot of volume. Luke has the tight end. We've seen pretty good games from him recently. 577 and a score against Ole Miss, and then 459 and 2 scores against Mississippi State. He's down at 3,200. If you don't want to go the Gunnar Helm route, but you do want to go with a gritty tight end, Luke Hass is your man. So that's another potential run back if you want to save some salary, not allocate all of it to Andrew Armstrong. And that's about it from the Arkansas side.
Okay, yeah, good spot. Texas receivers pretty cheap. Pecking order defined. I like it. I'm on the Texas guys. I believe in it. All right, let's go on to the next one here. Tulane versus Navy. 52 total. Tulane a 7-point favorite. Navy right along with Army. They're rolling right along, but they've had a few hiccups here. They got back on track with a 28-7 win in Week 11 against South Florida after a pretty disdainful loss to Rice and just getting whooped on by Notre Dame. This Tulane team is awesome, man. I've been a big Tulane fan this year. My man Darian Mensah still really cheap only 5.8K. He makes the throws he needs to. He usually can throw for 200 to 250, but the running game is so important to Tulane. It's really tough to see him have any kind of upside, especially in a matchup like this where there's going to be possession issues. But I do think Tulane will also be running the ball heavily. But that price of 5.8 is definitely interesting. The main play here is going to be Mekhi Hughes. When you look at what Navy does and doesn't do, defensively, they're giving up about 160 per game on the ground, around 230 through the air. So you can definitely run on them to a degree. Mekhi Hughes has been really, really good. The 52-6, just absolute destruction of Temple last week. He didn't really need as many touches as he's been getting in competitive games. We've been seeing him get 30-plus touches with ease. He had 19 carries only against Temple, but he still ran for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns. So still a pretty damn big game. He's been above 29 DK points in 5 straight games, only priced at 7.6. There's a lot of running backs on this slate, and to show you how expensive they are, he's all the way down there. Let's see, 1, 2. He's the 5th most expensive. So at 7.6, it just kind of gives you an idea of how packed this slate is for running backs. And the guys above him are definitely decent, but I feel like he's one of the best to me. So pretty high on him there. As far as the receiving group for Tulane goes, you can usually get some big plays out of this group. Mario Williams is the tried and true go-to guy, but a lot of short yard stuff. Does lead the team in targets with 59. Dante Fleming, the big play threat, 38 targets, 27 catches, 521 yards. And then Yule Keith Brown has become a favorite. 37 targets, 27 catches, 347 yards, and 4 touchdowns. But the prices are very cheap on the Tulane guys, all below 4K. We've been kind of messing about. We had the Colorado guys last week. Also, Sam Brown of Miami, that was one that we really liked. He had some pretty damn nice targets, dropped 2 that were really easy, and 1 touchdown pass that sailed over his head. So that one could have been a little bit different. I do think a guy like Yule Keith Brown, who will be like 2% owned at 3.5 if you're a multi-enter, makes a lot of sense. This is the type of game where they're going to be giving him the ball, especially in the red zone. So I like him for a touchdown upside. And then Mario at 3.9 is always cheap. On the Navy side, Horvath, a couple of weeks ago, you might consider that price at 9.3 because of how good he was and how many points he's been putting up. I mean, he had some 60s earlier in the year, some 40s. They've definitely had some offensive struggles lately. The South Florida game, they started to put it together late, and he had about 17, 2 touchdowns, 56 rushing yards, only 58 passing yards. Their passing game, they've been running this variation similar to Army with this kind of, spread elements to what they're doing with their running game, but that passing stuff hasn't worked as well. Granted, they played Notre Dame and got creamed, but the Rice game was pretty disappointing as well. So that 9.3 price point's pretty high for him. You look at his total stats for the season, they're impressive. Over 1,100 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, 4 interceptions for a service academy. That's definitely impressive. 870 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. But Tulane has just been so good. Despite the fact that they keep winning and drilling teams, they're still not getting a lot of respect. They're -7 on the road. I think that's a pretty sharp bet. I don't think Navy's going to have enough to compete here. They're going to have really a lot of success on the ground to keep Tulane's offense off the field. Looking at Tulane, they're only surrendering 114.6 yards per game on the ground and less than 200 through the air. So their defense has been nails, averaging almost 41 points a game, 4th best in the country, believe it or not, but they're only surrendering 18.7. So this is a team that scores a lot, defends well. I think they're going to have the juice there to cover that -7. If you want to get involved in Navy, there's really no point in the receivers for this team. Eli Heidenreich is priced at 6.5. He does lead the team in targets with 41, interestingly enough, and typically draws about 6 to 10 carries per game as well. So a variety of touches there. But his high price of 6.5, they're going to have to be efficient and effective touches. He's going to have to score a touchdown, maybe 2 to really pay that off. Not going to get the volume. At 4.5, you could consider Alex Texa. He typically gets a little bit more volume and is available for passes as well. Don't mind him as kind of a value piece, but again, we're going to get into some really high-level running backs throughout, and I don't know that paying down at running back is something I want to do. We kind of had a lesson to be reintroduced and reiterated last week. Raymond for Rutgers, who we liked as a cheapie with no Montague. He didn't really get it done. The passing game did for Rutgers, but more cheap receivers paid off than cheap running backs. It just kind of goes back to what we always say, paying up at running back, a premium position for college football, is really what we want to continue to do. So that's going to leave Texas a little bit low for me. At one time, Daba Fofana, like 2 years ago, was like the hottest showdown play and really, really good. Kind of not doing a lot this year, but he did have his most carries since last year, 15 against South Florida, 75 yards. So maybe they're reintroducing him and more touches. Maybe that's interesting. He's only 3K. So if you're doing the multi-entry thing, that's where you can throw in a play like that. But I would be very, very hesitant to play a Navy running back at 3K in my main lineup because you just can't guarantee if there's going to be 5 or there's going to be 25 touches overall. So heavy on Mekhi Hughes. I think he'll be somewhat popular when I look at the way things are priced, but just the volume that he's going to get, even with Navy, I don't think they're going to have much success running the football. Tulane's going to have a good game plan here. So Tulane -7, Mekhi Hughes in DFS. That is where my head is at there. Anyone you want to add to there before we move on?
Love Mekhi Hughes, man. As much of him as we can get.
Absolutely. All right. Utah versus Colorado, total of 45. Colorado's 11-point favorites. Big favorites over a tough Utah defense, but they're going to have to prove that they can score some points on offense with their QB7. What do you think?
Yeah, man. What a tough loss, just emotionally, physically, losing players on the depth chart. Just everything went wrong for Utah. I don't know how you felt about that holding call, but that was tough if you were a Utah fan. But if you were a BYU fan, you got to feel like something special is happening this year. They just keep finding different, legitimate, not legitimate, I don't know, but keep finding ways to win. Interesting team, that BYU team. As far as Utah, I don't know how they score any points in this one. They are pretty much going to have to run the ball like 50 times. They do not have a quarterback that is competent. They don't have any pass catchers left that are healthy. Even Kuthi, who's been Mr. Reliable, went on the field. He's out for the season now. Can we get a Wilson brother throwing to Dorian Singer to be a productive offense? Hopefully to make this a game, but I don't know that I'm going to put my DFS dollars there. Which means Mekhi Bernard could get like 30 carries. They never really do that, but if it could be like that Sione Vaki game where they're just like, well, yeah, he's a safety, but we're just going to put him in the backfield and run the ball the whole game because our quarterback, was playing beer pong last weekend. So it's going to be an interesting one for Utah. And it's tough to go into Colorado and dominate if you don't have both phases of your offense working. I think we see a really high volume game from Mekhi Bernard. Even at 7-1, I have some interest there. And this is a defense that you can run on. We saw Taj Brooks, and not to say that Mekhi Bernard is Taj Brooks, and not many people are, but he carried it 31 times, 137 and a touchdown, and also 4 catches for 51 yards. As a high volume back, he was able to be very productive against this Colorado team, even in a losing effort for Texas Tech. And I think there's a similar script to follow for Utah here. So Bernard is certainly interesting. On the Utah side, on the Colorado side, rather, I don't think I can get to Shador in this one. Pushing up on 10K is going to be quite a bit to get to Shador, and I don't think this is it's not even a 50-point total. I don't think he gets anywhere near to a 60-point total. And so the 404 game doesn't really seem like it's in the cards. This kind of seems like more of a slow, drag it out type game, and that doesn't really lend itself to a high score for Shador in particular. I don't want either of the Colorado backs, mainly because I don't like trying to pronounce Augustave, whatever it is. I don't really think we're going to go to him or Dallin Hayden. They don't like running the ball enough for that to matter. With the receivers, obviously Travis Hunter has been amazing all season, but the 12 to 15 catch 200-yard games are kind of slowing down. It seems like either defenses are focusing more on him, or he's a little tired from all the snaps he's accumulated, or just general variance has brought the target share towards being a little bit more democratic. We saw, Weister have a great game against Texas Tech, putting up, was it 682 and a touchdown, at a much cheaper price point than Travis Hunter. And then Will Shepherd heavily involved as well, 879 and a score for him. And so with those guys at the prices that they're at, and with this not being an especially high game, and with Utah's focus certainly going to be on containing Travis Hunter, I would have a lot more interest in Weister and Shepherd, especially Shepherd at that $3,600 price point. Save some funds there and still get a decent amount of volume. So I think the main focus from this one for me will be Bernard on the Utah side and Shepherd on the Colorado side, with sprinkling of Weister. And if somehow you have the salary, obviously Hunter's a great play, and he'll get a ton of volume, but it's not where I'm going to be focusing, with the other options being so much less expensive and getting, the gap in the volume decreasing.
Yeah, the Michael Bernard play, love. I was looking at props before the show, and it was like mostly between 73 and 75 rushing yards on most sites. And I just kind of thought to myself, you can run on Colorado. Feels like if he's going to get back to his first 100-yard game in several weeks, this would be it. So I'm going to be heavily on his rushing prop. And then I agree. Shador Sanders' week was last week. I was all the way in on him. We hit the Shepherd play. Definitely don't mind it with those receivers, but I'm cutting myself away from Colorado this week. Not nearly as exciting, because Utah, like you said, they're not going to score much, but I think their defense is still up to the challenge to at least make this one ugly enough to where there's a bunch of 2x type scores that aren't just going to get it done. All right, let's move on to Clemson versus Pittsburgh. This is a total of 53. Clemson 11.5-point favorites. Pittsburgh's offense has slowed way down. Defense has been giving up some stuff, and then we're dealing with injuries now. Eli Holstein officially is a game time decision. Couldn't finish out the Virginia game. They ended up dropping that one 24-19 because of it. Holstein actually hasn't been playable really for, 4 weeks now. Teams kind of had some time to figure him out, and he had a string of games that were relatively tough. Cal, who's on this slate, we know their defense is legit. Syracuse, he just got victimized because he didn't have to throw the ball very much, because that was the game that McCord felt like he should throw a million pick sixes. And then the SMU game, he was just terribly inaccurate for the most part, and Virginia just got hurt. So he's priced at 8.6 even if he does play. Clemson, you can definitely do some things against that defense, but I'm kind of out of my love affair with Holstein. If Yarnell were to start, he's priced at 8.4, so we're not getting a discount there. He was supposed to be the starter heading into the season. So no interest in that Pittsburgh quarterback room at all, regardless of what the news says. Desmond Reed is still very expensive, one of the most expensive players on the slate behind Hunter. He hasn't particularly been stupendous the last couple of weeks either. Still at 16 carries against Virginia, 20 overall touches with the targets, but that's just such a super high price. With his passing volume, we know he's very, very safe as far as his floor goes, but I just worry about the overall upside. And if Holstein can't go, that just makes it easier for the defense to kind of key in on Reed. He might get a bunch of short yardage stuff from Yarnell, but it's not going to go for very much yards. And I think it could be one of those games where it's like 3 receptions for -1 yards, and he just has a very high price. So I'll be interested to see if people are going to go there or not, but I'm probably going to be a little bit underweight compared to everyone else. And then Kanata Mumfield is dealing with what they're saying undisclosed. That was a hip injury, but he hasn't been great either. Like the offense, Pittsburgh offense, like we couldn't get enough of it for the first 5 weeks. And now we just haven't been using a lot of them. They've been on some short slates, so you had no choice, but they just haven't been too exciting. If you throw out Mumfield, you have a bunch of guys who are under 4K, similar position to what the Tulane receiving room was. I always like Raphael Poppy Williams at 3.7. Without Mumfield, theoretically more targets for him. He's typically just a 2-reception guy. And when I say that, if you look through his logs, all but 3 games, he's had 2 catches. So you've got a floor there and you might get a touchdown, but it hasn't turned into the season that I was kind of hoping for him. And then if you try to get involved with guys like Kenny Johnson, Sincere Lee, the 1 week it's Johnson, 1 week it's Lee. It all kind of just falls into, these prices are cheap, but without Holstein, I just have a lot of concerns here. Clemson being 11.5 favorites, it kind of seems like a lot for them when you look at it initially, but when you dig in, it's kind of like, well, they're probably going to win by 14 or more. As far as the pricing goes, threw me off when I first looked at it because Klubnik wasn't at the top of his own quarterback page.
Yeah, that was weird.
It scared me when I first looked at it earlier, and I was like, wait, did I miss something? So he's not even the most expensive player on his team for some reason, but he's not missing this game. It made me go and look. I had to search around because I was like, what do they know that we don't? He's priced at 8.6, which is reasonable. Pittsburgh's defense, though, man, they've been good enough, and Klubnik's kind of come back down to earth. The first, when he was in the top 5 Heisman race, just churning out big game after big game, you had to really look at defense, what they were facing. Wake Forest, Virginia, teams that you can really just decimate. Had some harder opponents recently, and we've seen that production go down. Like the Louisville game, he threw 50 times. You would have expected him to put up a 30 or 40, but he only hit 17.5 fantasy points. So feeling a little bit weird about his price. I don't know. I think what they'll do is their defense is going to take advantage of some opportunistic spots. And then they're going to give the ball to Maffa, whose price has thankfully, thank you, DK, for pricing him above 7K for the first time. And it feels like forever. I know it's only been a couple of weeks, but it seems like every time Maffa's on the slate under 7K, you can just pencil him in for 70% ownership. So at least at 7.3, it's more of a situation where he'll be under 30 now, but he still should be relatively high owned and high dollar single entry stuff. Because I think this is a game where he's going to get 30 plus touches, and whether that's 30 carries, a couple receptions, whatever, pretty safe bet that he's going to rush for 100 plus yards for the 4th time or 5th time in his 6th game, just because of that heavy volume. So 7.3 to me is not high enough of a price. Him and Mekhi Hughes still reasonably affordable options there. The wide receiver room, is pretty cheap. Also, Antonio Williams 5.9 is too expensive there, but everyone else is relatively easy to get to. Williams is just basically catching touchdowns. He has not had over 100 yards a single time this year, and to be priced at 6K, you would expect that to be, but he's just been a big-time touchdown guy, 8 touchdowns on the season. Brenningstool as the tight end. Klubnik hasn't been using him as much. He's been a fairly good safety valve throughout. He did catch a touchdown against Virginia Tech, but we're not seeing the ton of the upside there. He did drill Wake Forest for 104-1, but that's not typically what we're going to get out of him. 3 for 20 and maybe a touchdown or not is usually. Right now, there's basically 2 options you can look to for Clemson. The returning Bryant Wesco, who's there at 3.8. His first game back after injury was 3-1. Only had the 1 catch for 17 yards, but 3-1, you got to use Wesco every time. 3.8, maybe not necessarily. And now that's swapped, TJ Moore goes from 3.3 down to basically min price already 3.2. He did have 2 catches for 58 yards and a touchdown. He's had at least 50 yards or more in 3 straight games. It was nice to see him catch that long touchdown, even with Wesco back. These 2 are the future in the receiver room for Clemson. So if you need some value there, I don't mind using TJ Moore. And this is a situation where if you're penciling in Maffa as one of your main team running backs, you just need a cheap receiver, I am okay with TJ Moore. I prefer Wesco, just no price. It matters, just straight up. in a vacuum. I do favor Wesco, but I think more at that price is kind of silly. This to me feels like the Samuel Brown play from last week. I don't know necessarily many people are going to be on it. I think we see a sub, maybe 10%, 5 to 10%, not like the one that we saw with Samuel Brown. But the targets will be there, at least 3 or 4, and he's good for a long shot there. So if that Pittsburgh defense, lacks any discipline there, especially late in the game, he will make them pay. So I would be looking there, but Phil Moffitt definitely, and very, very cool on the Pittsburgh side now. I just can't envision myself paying almost 10K for Desmond Reed. But if we rewound back to week 6, I'd be trying to figure out a way to get him in. But we're just getting later in the season. Guys are getting hurt. Coaches have enough film. They're figuring out how to stop guys. The cream is rising to the top. Not that Desmond Reed's not one of the best running backs in the world at the collegiate level. I just don't think we need to spend that salary on him. So you may have a different opinion there because he's been so good to us, but it's a lot of money. Do you think he's usable there, or what do you feel like?
It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot in any context, but especially against Clemson and not super certain how efficient this Pitt offense is going to be, with either an injured Holstein or a backup in there. So, there were a lot of spots where 9-6 was like a slam for Des Reed. Is not one of those spots.
Yeah, they had a lot of these teams too, like even Clemson, they had such favorable schedules, and now they're starting to hit in some teams that are harder. So we'll see. All right, let's move on to the next game here. LSU versus Florida. Total of 56. LSU 4-point favorites. We got one of your guys here at a cheap price against a Florida team. Definitely a game I have interest in, and there's plenty of cheapies around. It sounds like there might be some guys returning back from injury as well. What do you got on this one?
Yeah. So this is the banger, right? Like of all the stuff we have on the slate, as far as high total, low spread, this one's pretty interesting. Starts with Nuss, and I've been a fan of using him this year more than I thought I would be. Did pretty well for us in the Ole Miss game. Did extremely well for us against South Alabama. Did better than you might have expected at Texas A&M. Completely let us down against Bama, and so I think a lot of people are going to go, I can't play Nuss. He's terrible, right? Because he had one bad game against Alabama, and he's pricey. So you're committing to the LSU offense if you use him. You can't just sprinkle in a 9-1 quarterback. But man, can you do some stuff against this Florida defense? It is definitely an explosive, an explosion heavy place to spend your money. And I want all parts of this LSU offense, starting with Nuss at quarterback, and certainly not limited to him. And so the guy that I think you're referencing, Caden Durham, has been our guy since he was 3-9 against South Alabama. In fact, we'd used him previously against UCLA, and he had kind of a down game by his standards against UCLA, but was still breaking long catches. That's kind of been his thing. Is he is going to get some passing work and break some long runs, but also break some long catches. And he's involved in multiple phases of the offense, and he's not generally going to be a 20+ carry back. He did do that against Arkansas, but more often than not, it's going to be like 15 to 18 touches, but extremely efficient, extremely explosive touches. And that lines up perfectly against Florida. And because he's involved in the passing game, you can comfortably use him with Nussmeier, and ideally get both pieces of those long catches that you're going to get out of Durham, and get whatever he gets in the run game as well. And at only 6'2", man, yeah, I'm fired up. I really do like this matchup for him, and it doesn't take away from the receivers. I also like the receivers. Obviously, Kyron Lacy, you're spending quite a bit if you're at 9-1 for Nuss and 8K for Lacy. You're like really committed to this game, and you better have some good run backs, which we'll get to that. Those are available as well. But I don't necessarily think we need to get to Kyron Lacy. If you look through his production, he has the stability of an 8K receiver, but he doesn't have the upside that I would look for from an 8K receiver. We haven't seen him put up that like 12 catch 250 and 2 type game. It's always about 5 to 7 catches, maybe 100 yards, maybe not, maybe a touchdown, maybe not. He did have a pretty big one against Nicholls State early on, but not non-con heroes are not necessarily who we want to get to here, and Nuss kind of spreads it out. Aaron Anderson is interesting, coming off of, everybody had a down game against Alabama, but he had a big game against A&M, and he does tend to get there through long catches. So at 5.5, he's a little bit more reasonably priced. You're not as committed to him. And then looks like we're going to get CJ Daniels back. He, was worked into the fold a little bit against Bama, but haven't seen a ceiling game from him pretty much all season, and could be a good opportunity. He's only at 3.5. And then if you want to get to the tight end Mason Taylor, he's at 3.5 as well. So really any of those guys, probably Anderson would be my favorite play, but any of them can be involved and will be involved against this Florida team. As far as the run backs go, I don't know, man. DJ Lagway, the price is pretty good and allows you to afford a lot of those LSU guys, but I think I'm going to stick to either his receivers or the running game, or possibly both. Really like Jaden Baugh here, especially if we get confirmation that Montrell Johnson is out. At only 3.5, we've seen him have that blow-up game against Kentucky. We saw him have some success, even against Texas, mainly garbage time, but still had some success against a tougher defense. I mean, Texas's backups are probably still better than LSU's starters to a degree, and he should have some room to run there. And at 3.5 for a running back that could see 20 carries is just absolutely phenomenal. So definitely want to have some Jaden Baugh as a run back. Elijah Badger, I would love to see more consistency out of him. He hasn't had the most consistent quarterback play. So, going to be a little bit tough there. At 4.1, you're not risking a whole lot, but you are using a receiver spot for it. There just haven't been a whole lot of other guys other than DK consistently catching passes. So really one of those two, if you want to run back outside of Badger and DK are kind of the directions that I would go with that. Aiden Mazzell has flashed a bit. Boardingham has kind of one game where he's done anything. It's pretty thin other than those two, and neither of those two are prohibitively expensive. So a lot of different pieces, but LSU side, just about everybody's in play. Florida side, Baugh, and then one of Badger or DK, I think can be used as run backs to complete pretty much a game stack at that point. Other than the fact that I'm probably not going to get to Lagway as a full game stack. I don't know. Maybe you see that differently. Maybe you like the price on it. What do you think?
It's a good price. Like I usually, I haven't been doing a lot of multi-entering for CFB this year. I've been more of a one lineup guy, which is a little different for me this year. And I don't think Lagway would make it for me. But if, throwing a large field lineup out there at 5.4, we know he can run. We know he can, make some plays. He has just enough. He threw for almost 300 against Kentucky, so he obviously can do some things. But I have more interest in the running game. You mentioned Bao, who, he's been good. The other guy, the other kid, Jacoby Jackson, he looked really good too. Like they'll probably both get work if Montrell can't go, but I think Jaden is the more exciting of the two. But they both have pop. And it's probably weird. I don't think there'll be a lot that play like Durham and a Florida running back together. That's one of those things that people have a hang up about. I have no problem running 2 running backs from the same game. So I think that might make us unique, but that's kind of how I'm looking at it myself.
Well, yeah, and especially when it's a game like this that we expect it to be kind of a ping pong back and forth type game, and
right.
Both running backs see work in the passing game or should and can. I'm a little more comfortable that if it was like using a two service academy running backs, that might be a little bit tough.
Yeah, and I'm feel better about the Florida running backs than I do the receivers there, because you mentioned DK Badger. He had missed the 1 game. He's a little high at 4-1 still. Like Boardingham is there. I don't feel confident enough to pick those guys out as I do one of those 2 remaining running backs if Montrell can't go. It is an afternoon window game, so we'll see how it shakes out, but we'll monitor the news. And yeah, I think Durham has a chance to be low owned again. You've been nailing the Durham play like every time it's low owned in a night slate and he goes off, so I'm excited about that one. All right, moving on.
Sorry, just wanted to get in there. Kind of wild that Elijah Badger at 4-1. We're like, oh, that's kind of a lot to pay for him.
I know it is weird, huh? It's just cool. I mean, if Lagway was not coming back from injury and like he had kind of gotten a chance to get into rhythm, like maybe it would seem better, because obviously Badger's worth more than that. I had always thought Badger was the better receiver coming into the season. Like everybody was, all about their receiver room and
he was like
Eugene Wilson
mid fives with Graham Mertz to start the year. And we're like, heck yeah, Elijah Badger, we're getting
But it was funny because we were like the only ones. Everybody else was like, Eugene Wilson's a stud and like he's good, but I was like, Badger's almost 1,000-yard receiver. Why aren't people talking about him? But it's a good call out, because now I'm looking at it like, I don't want to mess with the Florida receiving game, but that's a really good price for him. You're right. All right. Let's go on to, what am I at here? Syracuse versus Cal, total of 57.5. Kind of surprises me that it's one of the higher totals in the slate. Honestly, I feel like the under is very much in play. Cal 9.5 point favorites. Got to give it up to Cal. I'm getting skittish about targeting against them. Their defense this year has been pretty solid, giving up just under 19.5 points per game, holding their opponents to 100.4 rushing yards, and then defensively under 230 yards through the air. They've just done a really nice job in making games a little bit uglier. Really the game against Oregon State, where they just completely dominated them, and I was like, damn. And I know they just gave up a ton, like 30 plus to Wake, but they made some plays there. And overall, their games have not been fantasy friendly whatsoever. That Pittsburgh game was like 17-15. NC State game was really ugly. So this is one to me that just feels real bad. And Kyle McCord coming off just like those, pick six extravaganza. He's really started to fall apart here. The Syracuse's coaching staff, especially the head coach, beating his chest like, I should thank Ohio State for giving me Kyle McCord. Oh, what idiots. And then immediately just jinxes everything and they start falling apart. So it's really hard for me to get excited about this game. And the total is, it's usually the other way around. We'll be looking at a total and be like, Jake, doesn't this feel low? Like the over, like let's hit the over. This is the total opposite for me. I feel like it's going to go way under. I just couldn't imagine paying for Kyle McCord right now, the 9.3 price tag. He's just, he's throwing a ton, right? He kind of woke up a little bit against BC there, 392 yards, actually got above a decent fantasy score, but did have a fumble and got sacked a bunch of times. And I don't know if that's affecting him, but the price is just a little bit too high for us right now on McCord, especially against a Cal defense that I think can hurt him. And then this is a later window game, but still traveling that far. My Huskies have been getting tagged with these long ass trips, and we knew this would happen with these weird conference realignments, but Syracuse going the other way. I typically worry less about East Coast going west than I do west going east, but still can throw them out of whack a little bit perhaps. We do have LaQuint Allen there, 8.6K, another expensive price. I almost feel like Desmond Reed with him, that price of 8.6 there compared to 9.6 still feels really high. Allen had a really difficult time on the ground game against BC. Their running defense has been good. He saved it by catching 5 passes for 57 yards. And then once they got up in the red zone goal line area, he got 2 touchdowns. So his fantasy total was pretty much saved. Would have loved to have used him over Darius Taylor. That was a really bad one. We still did okay, but I was really regretting that one. But I'm really worried about him in this game too. And he's only hit over 100 yards once in his last 5. And his carries have been kind of sporadic. The one thing that has continually saved his fantasy output has been his like elite work as a pass catcher out of the backfield. And that is the direct result of McCord just getting picked off time and time again. They're making these short, safe throws to LaQuint Allen, and he's taking them 4 or 5 yards at a time. And those just PPR points are racking up for him. So if you're going to pay up for a running back, I'm kind of looking at like the Caden Durham, one of the Florida guys, Mekhi Hughes, Phil Maffa, like, that group there. But if you want to pay up for someone, probably would be a good idea there. We have Rashad Smith on the slate as well, but Allen should definitely be safe in terms of actual touches. I don't know that the yardage will be there, but if he scores 3 times and only rushes for 50 yards, he's still going to get kind of close. So you're paying for that touchdown upside. The receiving room, they're finally healthy. Everyone's back except for Zeed Haynes, who's been out since week 2. It does muddy the waters quite a bit. Jackson Meeks is the most expensive now. Kind of weird how we got here at 6'2", 7 for 105 last week after kind of, slowing down a little bit there. Trebor Pena is a nice GPP look. He hasn't been hitting those big 100-yard games like he was earlier in the season, but he is getting those 5 to 6, 7 targets each game, so he's relatively safe from that standpoint. A big game looming for him, perhaps, even though this defense, I think, will get to them. Gadsden had another 100-yard game. He's like the GPP ultimate play right now. 5.4 is a really good price for him. We saw him get up to almost 7K at certain points. But it's kind of gotten to the point where there's no middle. It's a 2 for 20 or it's a 5 for 101. So it's kind of difficult for me to get excited about him. Also, we have Justice Ross Simmons, who came back, a couple of weeks ago. He had the big game against Virginia Tech. Then he was the victim, 2 for 20 last week. He could very easily be the one that switches off and gets a 100-yard game. Umari Hatcher, still cheap. Catches touchdowns, had the 28-yard against NC State. So it's a very crowded receiver room for Syracuse. And I'm not as confident there to try to peg a guy at 5'4", 6K, and 6'2", and which one to actually use, especially in a game that I think is going to be lower scoring, even though Vegas doesn't. On the Cal side, you do have a decent enough price on Fernando Mendoza. Now, I think it was this point last year because Mendoza would do his normal 15, 18 fantasy points. But there was a stretch last year, if memory serves correct, where he's putting up some big games. And I think you were on one of the first ones. He has scored 35-plus DK points in back-to-back games. Oregon State threw for 364 and 2 against Wake, 385 and 2, rushed for 51 and a touch. Looked very good against Wake Forest. Price was 5'8" and 6'4" in those games. That would have been nice right now, but he is 7'2", which is still cheap enough to definitely take. And when you look at the various running backs we like, and then the quarterback pool, unless we're going to be playing Riley Leonard, which he's in a good matchup, then, the rest of the quarterbacks, I think I can do without. Maybe a Sawyer Robertson, which we'll talk about. You mentioned Nussmeier, but I don't think I mind Mendoza as much as a main team look, just because he is so priced low at 7.2 with the volume that he's been getting as a passer. And Jade Knott just still not healthy. Churned out another 23 yards on 14 carries last week. You can't trust Ott. His price keeps going down, but it's not down low enough yet at 7K. And the threat of Javian Thomas still there to take work. Mendoza is definitely where I'd want to look here in the passing game. We have seen some pretty nice outputs from Cal receivers and tight ends this year. Jack Endries leads the team with targets with 44, 39 catches, 460 and 2. We've seen a pretty nice bump for or waking up, I should say, for Tobias Merriweather, who has not been healthy at all. I think he got a few snaps in one game and then finally got a chance to play fully healthy, and they looked for him a lot against Wake Forest. 6 catches for 52 yards and a touchdown, priced at 4.8. In that game, he was given 10 targets, so he definitely kind of rose up the ranks really quickly. Endries was still a guy that he looked to, 5 for 39. He had 7 targets, but as far as the other receivers who had done well in the past, Tron Grizel, Isaiah Hunter, guys like that, Merriweather really quickly rose to the top. And coming over to Cal, he was expected to be their WR1 as soon as they got him healthy. So I do kind of like him as a pair for Mendoza there at 4.8, but it's definitely a price from a receiver that I feel like I may not get to, depending on what happens here with running back. Now we do have some cheaper options, 7K and below, that we're kind of highlighting here. So we may end up in that 5-6K range for a receiver. I still prefer Endries a little bit because I trust him to do some work against the Syracuse defense, especially in the red zone. But it's hard to ignore Merriweather getting 10 targets right off the jump when he's healthy. So Cal passing game, if you're using anything but betting the under on this one and anticipating Kyle McCord throwing at least one, maybe 2 interceptions. We'll see if they give us an interception prop somewhere. If they do, I'm taking the over for sure. Do you have any Mendoza affinity this week? Because like I said, I'm fairly confident. I remember you were on him last week early, and it seemed like the end of the year last year, he went on this little run like he's doing now.
Yeah. Well, he was a big part of my night slate last week. And, I didn't expect that he was going to throw it 56 times. I was more thinking that, him using his legs is what I was going to benefit from. And he did that too, 51 in a score. But Cal is pretty committed to the pass if they're not going to run on Wake Forest. They only ran it with running backs 19 times total, and they threw it 56. Like that is pretty tilted to the passing game, and I think if that continues, Mendoza at the price that he's at is pretty compelling.
Yeah, it's like odds obviously not right. They're doing just enough with Thomas, but yeah, I think Mendoza.
Did you give Mikey Matthews a shout in the passing game?
Yeah, was he down there at 3.8, 8 for 83 and a touch? I mean, he did it with Merriweather around. So I mean, if he's throwing 50 times, so there's going to be a lot of receivers who are going to.
A lot of guys are going to catch some passes if you throw it that much.
So yeah, he's definitely there. I mean, the targets were there for all of them. I'm definitely intrigued by Merriweather, but yeah, Matthews, Hunter, Endries, Merriweather, all under 5K. Definitely some viability there. But I'm going to be ignoring the Syracuse side, I think, and I hope it doesn't hurt me. But Cal has been a really tough team to target against this year for DFS purposes. All right, let's move on. We have BC versus SMU, total of 54, 19-point spread. Thomas Castellanos is gone into the transfer portal the minute they announced Grayson James as the starter. He was out. And we like Castellanos here at the show, so we hope he ends up somewhere fun. I joked with someone I wanted to go to the MAC, but he'll probably go to like Florida State or something. I don't know. But break down this one for us, because SMU, you've been pretty damn good about predicting when the SMU guys are going to be good to play. And this is probably a matchup now with a BC team that's clearly going to be quitting on the rest of the season. Chance for some points here for SMU.
So I'm actually going to start on the BC side because it's an interesting spot for them. No Tommy Gunn anymore, and I'm fine with that. He was always at a tempting price point, and he didn't always come through. We'll put it that way. Excited to see how they do with Grayson James. Maybe that's an improvement. Maybe that is the tide that lifts all boats with Castellanos not back there anymore, with some passes actually being thrown. We'll see. It's going to be a wait and see there. The point that I wanted to make, though, Kai Robichaud. Let's go his game log. 19 carries, 6 carries, 6 carries, 18 carries, 4 carries, 9 carries, 10 carries, 28 carries against Syracuse. I don't know, man. I don't know where that came from. I was not expecting it. He was down at 4-1. He went 28, 198, and 2 in the game that they were just like, yeah, we can't have Castellanos throw the ball anymore.
The RB2 went nuts too. Like 2 of them went absolutely nuts. It was weird. Such a weird game.
Yeah, well, and it's also weird that like Treshaun Ward is the RB2 in that offense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think was Robichaud owned at all. He couldn't have been.
No.
How do you not give the ball back to a guy that went 28, 198, and 2? I don't think it's a good play. I don't think that they're going to have the ball very much. But they certainly seem to want to give him the ball when they do have the ball. And yeah, I'm tempted. I think I have to play a few lineups just to have a Robichaud or a Ward line, just because they clearly seem committed to running the ball. And if you're going to play a team like SMU that is a pretty high-flying offense when they want to be, I think that's a decent enough strategy. Try to pound the rock and keep the ball out of their hands. And you might get some explosive runs along the way. So BC running game, whichever part of it you like, could be interesting, could make us some money. Just know that they're 3-score dogs in this one, and if SMU gets up big, that's a tough way to try to counteract a big deficit is by running the ball a lot. So gonna hope that game flow goes in your favor if you use that. If not, Lewis Bond, a little bit back from the dead with some production. Maybe Grayson James has a little bit better. It gets a little bit more consistency out of Lewis Bond. We'll see. At 4.9, he's in play. Not forcing him by any means. Kamari Morales, also interesting. Always seems to be good for a touchdown whenever they get in the red zone, and actually has some shake and some wiggle to get some longer plays too. But those are kind of the only two options in the passing game. On the SMU side, you can certainly score points on Boston College. SMU has done well to turn things over to Kevin Jennings, but not put things entirely on the shoulders of Kevin Jennings. Unlike Fernando Mendoza, we are not going to see him throw it 50-plus times. We've not really seen him throw it 30-plus times. It is usually 20 to 25 attempts for Kevin Jennings, with some rushes in there. When he was down at 6K, 6.2, whatever, that was fine. Up at 7.7 and as a 3-score favorite, I'm not sure I'm getting to Kevin Jennings in that scenario. Brashard Smith is fantastic and is also extremely expensive. Could very well get a ceiling game out of him again at 8.8. You'll need it. You really need probably 102 as a floor, and then also some work in the passing game, which he does get in order to pay off that total. But he is a luxury, not a necessity for me on this slate. There are a number of running backs that I think we can get to that are a little bit less expensive, and we don't need as much of a ceiling game from them in order to have them make value. Roderick Daniels is interesting, 3,900. He's pretty versatile and gets involved in all aspects of the offense. Haven't seen, the big double-digit carry game from him with Brashard Smith being healthy, but still is a guy that they like to get the ball to in different ways, and at only 3,900, not too bad. Keyshawn Smith, also an interesting flyer, 3,500. A lot of receivers on this slate in that, below 4K range that you can get to, and those are guys to mix and match as well. Jordan Hudson is the most expensive of the bunch and really doesn't deserve it anymore. He's not only not seen a lot of volume, he's not seen a lot of explosiveness this year. And it's a shame because there was a lot of hype with him coming into the season, thinking that he was going to be one of their leading receivers, and he hasn't amounted to that in any way, shape, or form. Only 178 yards on the season. So you'll want to stick to pretty much just Daniels and Smith in the passing game, and Brashard Smith if you can get to him in the running game. If you choose to live dangerously, whatever BC pieces you want to use as run backs, primarily Robichaud and Ward are the ones that are of interest there based on how I think BC is going to attack this game.
Yeah. It's a weird one. I agree that the temptation to want to get to Brashard Smith, looking at how well he's played, all the injuries in the running back room. But yeah, I'm trying to be disciplined because as somebody who plays the hell out of running backs, there's some nice ones up there, but I don't think we need to do it. And I think I'm feeling solidified with you on that. Louisville versus Stanford, total of 58. I believe it's 1 point lower. It's almost the highest highest game on the slate, but not quite. 20.5 favorites are Louisville. Stanford has been pretty tough against the run, but not because they're actually like super good against the run this year. They're giving up about 140 per game. It's because they're so bad against the pass, and teams can pass against them so easily. They have a tendency to just keep doing it and not run the football quite as much. So this is a really nice passing opportunity. Tyler Shuck there at 7.9, definitively some upside. I think he's a nice GPP look there. Running back wise for the Cards, we've had some pretty nice outings from Isaac Brown. He's finally priced up to an area at 6.7 where it's a thought. Rush for 151 and a touchdown, 3 receptions for -1 yards. Mentioned that earlier for another running back, but a big 27. He scored over 20 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5. Definitely solid. It's like I said, it's not like you can't necessarily run against Stanford. They have been decent there. But it's the passing game that just flourishes so much. And because of the fact that we know Colin Lacey's done so he can get paid for next year, we've seen other injuries to their rooms, various guys, Thompson banged up. We saw the reemergence of Ahmad Huggins-Bruce and then back to dead against Clemson. But one thing we've seen, Chris Bell has been pretty steady throughout the season, but one thing we've seen in this receiving room throughout is Ja'Cory Brooks just continue to put up huge numbers. He was actually not as good against Clemson, but still involved with 6+ targets, 4 catches for 42 yards, and that's a down game for him. Typically, we're going to see him go for 6, 7, 8 receptions, 100+ yards, multiple touchdowns. This is the game to do it. And as I looked while you were talking in the last game, I was building some early lineups here and putting in those 4 running backs that we've talked about too. You've talked about 2 I have that I like. And it does allow me to pay for 1 receiver. And it's not going to be Travis Hunter. I'm pretty sure it's going to be Ja'Cory Brooks. So I'm also looking at his props pretty heavily. 7.7 is a lot. It's the highest price he has been, but he is by far and away one of the best receiving options on the slate. Leads the team in targets with 71. Next closest is Chris Bell with 37. 48 catches for 841 yards, 8 touchdowns. Will be a 1,000-yard receiver by the time it's all said and done. I think it'll be damn close after this game when he probably has 125 to 150 receiving yards. So very high on Ja'Cory Brooks. We've gotten burned by some of the high-priced receivers in the past. Josh Kelly came through last week. You can take your shot with Bell, and this is the matchup to do it at 3.5. You have Huggins-Bruce if you think he kind of rises from the dead a third time at 3.5. You have the tight end Mark Redmond, who will have some touchdown upside in this matchup for sure. But I just personally want to get up to Ja'Cory Brooks in this matchup. On the Stanford side, you've got a matchup against Louisville where you can take advantage with a guy like Ashton Daniels, who did rush for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. He hasn't been particularly against NC State back in week 10. He hasn't been particularly fantasy relevant much this season. We haven't had Stanford on many slates either. And we did see a situation where NC State just, threw the ball on them like everyone can. And Justin Lamson came in and he threw for 103 yards and he rushed for a touchdown. And so I don't think it's going to be like some sort of QB controversy here, like some were trying to make it, but maybe. But Daniels is a really intriguing GPP start there at 6K. Definitely will be called upon to do some things here against this Louisville team that's going to score at will. Daniels is much more comfortable as a runner. He's much more of a running back when you play him. You're hoping for that 100+ yards, sort of like Zion Chris from Houston, a couple of touchdowns. He did show that he could throw the football a little bit, 214 and a touchdown against Wake Forest, to get picked off twice, but he's a really intriguing look. And I think this game has some mini stack opportunities for tournaments. Certainly wouldn't recommend playing him in your main build, but that Louisville defense is very, very susceptible to big explosive plays. And that's something that Daniels can definitely give you. And you look at it, they're giving up over 24.5 points per game right now. Speaking of Louisville, 230 through the air, 150 on the ground. There are opportunities here for this Stanford offense. Running back wise, man, it's a brutal room. They should have kept or tried to keep Emmitt Smith's kid. Like, he's rotting away in the SEC, but Micah Ford banged up, didn't play in their last game. Cedric Irvin, who coming into the season, I honestly thought had a chance to be one of the better receivers in the or running backs in the conference. That was very wrong. Gets his 2 to 3 touches per game. The running game is just terrible. So they're using Ashton Daniels as that runner. And I almost wonder if we'd see Lampson and Daniels like on the field together in that regard, because there is no other running back that you can trust on the Stanford team. Now, the receiving game for Stanford is interesting. I think the 5.2 price point for Alec Eomaner is going to get overlooked a little bit. 4 for 108 and a touchdown against NC State. Lampson liked him a lot. He had 11 receptions against Wake Forest for 96 yards. Very heavily involved, despite the fact that this offense has been pretty putrid throughout. Targeted 83 times this season, 46 catches for 592 yards and 5 touchdowns. Alec is very talented. If you stuck him on Clemson with Klubnik or threw him on Colorado, like this dude would be an 8, well, maybe not Colorado because they're so deep, but he'd be a 1,000-yard receiver at this point. He's that good. And the fact that he's putting up these numbers on such a terrible team just shows you and speaks volumes about that. So I actually kind of like the Alec, Ja'Cory Brooks, mini stack of this game there for a main lineup. I'm definitely kind of looking that way. Ishmael Cisse at 3.6 is cheap. He had some nice looks early in the season, has fallen out. There's not enough passing volume to support another receiver. Emmett Mosley has also showed out a bit, but it's mainly just Eomaner. Tiger Backmeyer last year was a really nice night slate play for us. Kind of dead this year as well because they don't have any quarterback play. So I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to stay away from Stanford entirely, but Ja'Cory Brooks is definitely my favorite pay up at the receiver position this week. And I think I'm dangerously close to playing Alec with him there, regardless of what happens at quarterback, because when they throw it, it's typically going to go to him. And I think he can do enough against this Louisville mediocre defense to pay off that 5.2 range. That's been a pretty chalky spot, the 5K receiver the last few weeks. So maybe people notice him, but I am banking on him being, sub 10% owned and being a chance for us to get a big 100-yard game out of him. All right. You anything you want to add there before we move on?
Pretty much covered that one.
All right. Purdue versus Penn State. Total of 51. 29-point road favorites are Penn State. I don't know. Purdue had to be on the slate. They like to keep it to top 25 games at this point in the season, so I get it. But there were some other games maybe we could have gotten instead. Hell, I would have taken Oregon State and Air Force over this one. Penn State should absolutely murder this Purdue team. What kind of fantasy goodness is going to come out of this one? What can we do here? Because I just almost feel bad for Purdue. You and I were talking privately. It's like, damn, what happened to this team?
Yeah. So Penn State is nice to talk about from a DFS perspective because we don't have to talk about quarterback at all. Too many cooks in that kitchen, and none of them really do a whole heck of a lot. So we can skip right down to the running backs. Singleton has full practice logged as of Wednesday. I believe he practiced again. So we're not going to get a 4.9 Katron Allen as a feature back getting 30 touches. Unfortunately, that would have been fantastic. But I don't know. I want to have it for like 2 years. I've wanted to have interest in this Penn State backfield. I want to commit to one of these guys, and they're just both at price points where it is slightly uncomfortable. Singleton could very well go for 10 carries and 200 yards and 3 touchdowns against this Purdue team. Like, it's just, that's very easily attainable. But if he doesn't get that level of efficiency, somebody else is scoring those touchdowns, and he's not going to play deep into the game. Everyone is coming out by the third quarter in this one. Katron Allen, a little bit more interesting because he's the guy that they'll kind of use to salt away the game once it's in hand. They did that against your Huskies, as you're probably acutely aware of. He ended up.
I used him in that one. I had him in that game. I knew
he ended up with 20.98 and a touchdown. And at 4.9, especially with probably some upside from even that stat line at 4.9, that's certainly interesting. The guy that we really got to talk about when it comes to Penn State is Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren's the goal line back. Tyler Warren's the quarterback sometimes. Tyler Warren is a tight end by position, rarely actually plays tight end, and somehow catches, 7 to 10 passes every week. And one week caught 17 passes for some reason, and, always gets some yardage in there. Does Tyler Warren do Taysom Hill things, or does Taysom Hill do Tyler Warren things? It's really the question on the minds of the people. He's 7'2", and so it's kind of one of those things where it's a lot to pay for a guy that is in a game that's a blowout, and they don't really need him to do all of his things, but they kind of just have him do all those things anyway. And so it's a big decision point for me, is if you want to, maybe he's extremely involved in those first 2 quarters and gets like 100 yards each of passing, rushing, and receiving, and like 6 touchdowns. And you're like, well, shit, why didn't I play Tyler Warren? Or Singleton and Allen break 5 long touchdown runs and Tyler Warren doesn't do anything. And then they're like, okay, we'll shut it down. We need him next week. Interesting spot for that. And it really could go either way. And he does have a ton of upside. And I generally would shy away from using expensive players in a predicted blowout like this. But much like I was very interested in Judkins, and all of Judkins' production ended up going to Henderson, but Henderson still had a good game against Purdue last week. And so somebody's going to score some points here. Warren and Allen are probably the guys that I am most interested in terms of getting to those points. Wallace also at 3.6. He's only a receiver. He doesn't score points in a whole bunch of different ways. So like Warren does, a little bit narrower path with Wallace. But very interesting decision point on Allen versus Warren. I do think there will be fantasy goodness on the Penn State side. Can't say the same for the Purdue side. I don't think there's anybody that I want to use for Purdue, and I think that's a statement that I can make for the rest of the season. So Allen, Warren, and what else you got?
Yeah, no, going up against the Huskies, I knew we were going to have a hard time scoring. Our secondary has been pretty good, so I knew we were going to have trouble with Katron Allen especially. And then I just, I didn't forget, but I didn't realize that they were going to pound Warren so much in the goal line area, red zone, and that's just our weak spots. So that was tough, but I could see the same thing. I mean, it was 35-6. So they're going to put up like 40, 45, maybe more. Purdue's going to score 0. So even though it's going to be a blowout, yeah, there's merit because he's going to score at least 1 touchdown. That's a guarantee. I'm sure it's anytime touchdown prop is horrible.
Well, those were his second and third rushing touchdowns, and he had a total of 3 rushing yards. Seven rushing yards, 3 rushing attempts. Yeah. And so I think they were like, well, wait a minute, why don't we just make him the goal line back? He's doing everything else, which is scary because they figured out another way to use Tyler Warren. We might not have seen like the ultimate Tyler Warren usage yet. Like what he could end up being like a 12K DK player by the end of the season. So
absolutely,
it's a scary trade, and I kind of got to have him.
Yes, it's definitely scary. Coming off of his huge game the week after, he bricks so hard, and that would be the worry. Like, do they not have to do much with him? They got to keep him healthy, right? But I do like the Allen play. If I'm going anywhere main wise, I'm pretty committed to Katron Allen. I have been for a long time because he's always the cheaper of the two. So I don't know if he's going to make it for me, but I definitely like him. But yeah, it gives me something to think about because I'm ready to just jam in Ja'Cory Brooks, but maybe I do need to play Warren. Maybe I do need to get him in there. Just kind of worrisome that they won't need him against Purdue. But gosh, he's going to score at least once, but maybe he scores 5 times. Like you said, never know there with what they can do. Purdue is very forgiving when it comes to the other team scoring. All right, moving on. We have Virginia versus Notre Dame. Total of 50.5. The total relatively low. Spread is 23.5 in favor of Notre Dame. Now, Virginia has been a very soft defense for most of the season. That I can tell you for sure. Defensively, Notre Dame is elite, so we can pretty much stay away from the Virginia guys here. I always like Malachi Fields, one of my favorites, has nearly 100 targets this year, but the inconsistent nature of the offense and Colin Drea, God bless him. He tries his hardest, but he just makes so many mistakes all the time, every week. And 6-7 price for him is really good, but I just can't use people against Notre Dame right now. And that goes for the running back spot, which I do like Xavier Brown. I mentioned Xavier Brown all the way back in week 2. Like, damn, this guy is somebody to watch. And he's been doing really well. He had that big game against Pitt. Never would have landed there. But they're definitely giving him more work, or trying to, as much, if not more, than Kobe Pace. So he's at least interesting at 3-7. But this is all about the Notre Dame side here. You got to make a real decision, much like with Warren. You got to make the decision, because I think, to me, Riley Leonard is one of the best, if not the best, quarterback on the slate. And we were worried a little bit last week, like, damn, they're going to blow Florida State out. How much Riley Leonard are they going to really need to have? What are they going to push him to do? They've scored 52 points. He put up another 32, and it's like at 8-7, you'd love to have that 32, right? 215 yards, a touchdown, rushed for 70, another 2, and like, this is another blowout where they're going to score another 50 points. Like, 3 out of their last 4 games, they've scored 49 or more points. And 3 of those 4 have been blowouts. He scored 29 or more fantasy points in each. So we don't really need to worry about the blowout or him not doing as much, because the offense is so revolving around him, and he's going to score at least 1 rushing touchdown. Like, you can't get his anytime touchdown prop like under -800 anymore, but you can get 2 for a pretty decent price still. And he's been scoring multiple touchdowns on the ground several times this year. And if he's going to be throwing 200 plus yards on top of it, it just makes him really, really safe as a quarterback. And we have those cheaper running backs. Maybe we can walk it back a little bit and play, Durham and Jaden Bow, and not play one of Mekhi Hughes or Phil Maffa, and get to Riley Leonard, because he's going to definitely be able to do whatever he wants against this Virginia team. They've been decent against the run, but Riley Leonard's just another animal altogether. His running ability has really stunted Jeremiah Love. Love is a really good running back. If Love was on, I don't know, Florida State or Boston College, and even a lower level team, like, he'd be able to put up a lot of stats. And he scores a touchdown every week. I don't think he's not scored. Yeah, I just looked. He scored a touchdown in every single game. So you've got some prop opportunities there, but not a lot of volume. Typically going to get 10 to 15 out of him, fantasy point wise, at 6'3". And then we pretty much wrote Jadarian Price for dead. Like, hey, it's Jeremiah Love and it's Riley Leonard. I think Price is still dead, but he rushed for a 65-yard touchdown just because last week. He did have a 95 yards because of that. But if you take that 65 off, he still was kind of his normal, like, 4 for 25 kind of thing. So I don't think you need to rush to play him at 3-1 just because of one random touchdown. But I do have interest in the receiving game. All of Riley Leonard's receivers are 3-4 or below. And because of this newfound ability to throw the football and success that he's having, these guys are actually in play. I would have said Chris Mitchell, who's there at 3-2, but then he goes against FSU and gets 1 target, 0 counting stats. I really wanted Chris Mitchell to be good this year. The FIU transfer hasn't quite worked out. Bo Collins is mainly the guy that you can kind of rely on if you want a Notre Dame receiver. Still a very low priority, but if you need some value there and some of the other value makes you uncomfortable, or you're making an afternoon slate, I do think playing a guy like Bo Collins makes a lot of sense. He has had double-digit fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. And then you have guys like Mitchell Evans, priced at 3-4, scored the touchdown last week. Jaden Greathouse. There's a variety of different options that you can look to there. I think Bo Collins is kind of the one that's probably safest, and I do think he's going to have a fairly decent game here. But typically running Riley Leonard naked, but if you want to pair, that's it. Big decision if you want to pay for him. I think for me, it's Riley Leonard or it's going to be Fernando Mendoza. So I'll have to make a decision there, because I just made a Mendoza lineup that I really like, but at the same time, I'm just getting tired of fading Riley Leonard late. Played him all the time in the middle part of the season. Haven't been playing him as much. At 9.5, you can survive a 30, but on the off chance he scores 3 times and puts up a 40, that's going to be a point total that you really would like to have. So we'll see. Second highest player on the slate at quarterback at 9.5, 200 below Shedeur Sanders. Interested to see what the ownership projections look like when we get those tomorrow. All right, let's move on. We got Nebraska versus USC. Your USC Trojans, 7-point favorites against Nebraska, a 51 total. Nebraska offense has been pungent, but USC's defense hasn't been too great lately either. So what do we got here?
Yeah, so we have at least one new quarterback. So big news. Big news on the Trojan front. Jaden Mayava takes over as the next great Lincoln Riley quarterback, or at least the quarterback for the last couple games of the season.
I love Jaden.
7.5. I don't know. Couldn't we get him at like 5.3 for one slate? They have him priced up right there where Miller Moss is. Guess they saw that one coming. I think they announced it a while ago. So understandable move by DK there, but would have liked to see a little bit of a discount. Nebraska defense has actually been pretty nails, most of the year. And so I am not rushing to plug Jaden Mayava in by any means. Does have some talent, does have some mobility. Don't know that this is necessarily the spot where I want to use him, breaking in a whole new offense. He's got some weapons, but it's just, I don't know. I don't love the spot for him. If he were down in the 5 or even 6K range, probably would feel differently about it, but enough other quarterbacks in familiar systems with higher floors that I think we can get to at that price range or even below. Woody Marks up there at 8.5. Have seen him do some pretty good things this year. Nebraska defense, again, pretty tough. I don't know that I want to bang him into the line 25 times against them, and he's kind of gotten his on volume as opposed to a ton of efficiency. So I'm not jumping out of my seat to play him either. The pass catchers, and we've seen for a while now, last couple of years, pretty diversified group of pass catchers out of USC. Mekhi Lemon has actually showed to kind of be the most consistent one of the bunch, not the one that I was expecting. I'm been on the Zachariah Branch train for quite a long time, and he's shown flashes this year. He's 6 and 102 against UW, but yet to get in the end zone, at least as a receiver. He might have returned a kick again. I know he did last year, but Mekhi Lemon has kind of been the man, and he's only 5K. Jacoby Lane also there. He's had pretty marked success so far this season. Branch at 4.8 has been hit and miss, but has shown some explosiveness and obviously one of the most athletic guys around. And then Deuce Robinson, limited volume, but has had some opportunities to get in the end zone. So all 4 of those guys are potentially in play if you don't want to use Mayava, but you do want to get some exposure to the game. I'm not forcing any of it, but it is an interesting spot for Nebraska. There is talk that it might not be Raiola. He's been injured. He's been bad. He has not lived up to the hype. Henrik Harburg's not real good either. So I don't think that they're really excited about creating quarterback controversy where there doesn't have to be one. Think this might be a confidence builder type game for Raiola. Price is way down. In another world, maybe we consider him at 5.5, but he's not put up more than 18 points all season. So I don't know that we need to play that game. Running game, Dowdle, we've used him a few times, and he's down there at 4.2. 1460 and a score against Ohio State. Pretty tough defense on the road, was able to do that. Then 1761 and 2 to go with some work in the passing game against UCLA, even in a losing effort. I think he has quite a bit more room to roam against USC, and at 4-2, man, that's a pretty good spot in a game that I think mainly goes overlooked from a DFS perspective. So definitely have a lot of interest in Dowdle. And then the receivers, we've seen certain guys flash at different parts of the year. Nair is probably the one that, has the most explosivity and potential to have a big game. But I'm not really looking to get to any of these receivers. I think they run Dowdle quite a bit, and they'll have success doing that. So no need to change that up too much. So I think just Dowdle from the Nebraska side, and then probably just Lemon with varying degrees of the other receivers, but mainly Lemon on the USC side.
Yeah, Dylan Raiola, wants to look like Patty Mahomes and act like him, but he doesn't play like him, at least not yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
I do, before the season, I know you're high on him. I got him on best ball, so I mean, obviously, I wanted pieces of him too. Only other ad I want to have is Ja'Cory Barney. I talk about the dude every time Nebraska's on the slate. He was pretty good against UCLA, 4 for 78. He's definitely become their WR2, and they do give him carries. So when they get into the red zone area, they scheme and get him the ball. So I would have preferred him to be 3-1, but 3-6 is definitely playable for him. All right, moving on to the last game on the slate, and probably the biggest stack opportunities and will be popular, I'm sure. Baylor versus West Virginia, the total of 59. This is the highest on the slate. Right now, Baylor is a 1-point favorite, but I could see that kind of going back the other way because we do get the news that Garrett Green has been practicing all week and is going to be available. I don't think they've quite named him the starter, but that's kind of an inevitability, right? Getting Green back, as much as Nico Marichal has looked okay, and they've won their last 2 games with him. They're just more explosive with Garrett Green. And then also getting back big play threat and one of his favorite receivers, Hudson Clement, who is going to play against Baylor after he missed the last 2 games. So getting some weapons back here for West Virginia. Green is interesting at 7-4. This is a really good matchup. Both Baylor and West Virginia can be forgiving. Baylor is giving up almost 27 points a game to their opponents, 230 yards through the air, 145 yards on the ground. And then West Virginia, 28.5 points per game to their opponents, 263 passing yards and just 125 rushing yards. You can pass on both of these teams. This is a spot where I'd probably get tripped up with Green normally, 7-4. It's really good for him. We know he has the rushing upside. His accuracy has been kind of in the toilet throughout the season. But this is a big upside type of spot for him. And we'd play him, and then, he either gets banged up or underwhelms. The running backs score 4 touchdowns. He hits 20. It's a really alluring price, but I try to have this rule when possible, guys coming off multiple weeks of injuries, not to put them into my main lineup right away. And I've been a big Garrett Green user over the years. So I'm kind of lacking on him out of a worry more so than anything, but I do think he's a really good play overall. Running backs wise, it's a shared thing, but Jaheim White's kind of separated. CJ Donaldson's really banged up. I don't think he's going to be healthy the rest of the year. White's cheap, always at 4.7, typically good for a few receptions as well, so you can use him, but we have those cheap guys that we've talked about that I do like better. And the threat of Donaldson being there and Green returning, just kind of downside to everything there for him. The guys that Green likes, in addition to Clement, also his tight end, Cole Taylor. Taylor had 5 for 30 in their last game, but, with Green, you see him 5 for 55, 4 for 61. Definitely a better play at 3-3. So if you're going to play Green and you want to pair, I think the safe thing to do is to play Taylor. Clement as the big play threat. Trelon Ray is there at 3-6, also a big play threat. Played pretty well with Nico the last couple of weeks. Have some cheap options that you can look at here in West Virginia. Hard to trust any of them on a game-to-game basis. This is more of a team that you're going to have more success with multi-entering and sprinkling them into various lineups in a single lineup setting. I have concerns about West Virginia. And then with the Baylor spot here, Daquan Finn, man, transfers from the MAC, one of the best players in the MAC, and just, doesn't get an opportunity because Sawyer Robertson seemingly out of left field just takes over and plays so well. Had a terrible game for the most part. They've won against TCU in week 10, 37-34, but wasn't really because of him. He threw for 242, but the running game of Baylor, God, it was so good. I was so mad for not using it. 12 fantasy points for him there, but he did put up 32 plus in 3 of his previous 4. 8.7K, highest price he's been all year. This is one of those you put at the luxury plays. We talk about that a lot instead of a necessity. I think that's kind of where I'm at with Sawyer. I'm still looking at Riley, if anything, if I'm not going down to Mendoza, but Sawyer's probably the 3rd or 4th option at quarterback there for me. At 6'4", you have Bryson Washington. The running back room for Baylor has gone through changes throughout seemingly the last couple of years, but especially this year, you've seen a different guy be the RB1 almost every week. The matchup was prime against TCU, and I had Washington penciled in, and then got stupid. We played Rocket Sanders, so that worked out good because that week he went off too. But it made me get off of Washington for something else, and he proceeded to go for 196 and 4. So all of the stuff they scored was all him, and he just absolutely dominated. It's the second time in the last 3 games that he's put up over 30, and it's time to start paying attention to Washington at this point. 17 carries against Oklahoma State, 10 against Texas Tech, and then 26 against TCU. He does factor in as a receiver, had a couple of games, 6 for 37, 3 for 24, 2 for 22. Still affordable. It feels bad if you haven't been using him yet, and now you're going to use him at his highest price. I always hate that spot because you're susceptible. If he has a bad game, it's like, wow, I paid the highest price possible. But when you look at the other running backs, Dawson Pendergrass, who's been okay. He had a big game against Oklahoma State like everyone does, but for the most part, his touches have been lower. It's been more efficiency. And then Richard Reese is just kind of a plotter. If he can get something in the goal line area, they will give it to him. But for the most part, like Washington is clearly the best back in this running back room at this point, and West Virginia is definitely a good matchup for him. The Baylor receivers, as every week, they're cheap. Kind of can pick your poison. Sometimes it's Josh Cameron. We've seen Hal Presley be near min price and work out. Ashton Hawkins has had big games. Keatron Jackson, Michael Trigg at tight end. So they have a myriad of options that they can look to there. Cameron leads the team in targets with 42, Hal Presley with 42, Hawkins with 39, and Trigg with 37. So they're pretty bunched up there because they do truly take turns and they're cannibalizing each other. Because like I said, 1 week we had the 474 for Hawkins, then he'll get 3 for 11. I think the safest route if you want to go with a Baylor receiver is Hal Presley. Remains very cheap, and he's typically going to give you at least one of 2 things, a touchdown or like a 3 for 40, 3 for 50 type game, and just eke his way into double digits. You're getting about 10 to 12 fantasy points at 3-4. So he's definitely a reliable cheapie that you don't typically get at that price point. Not necessary to have Sawyer if you do want to play him, kind of a last value in type of look. He would be my favorite option as a pairing partner, but Hawkins and Cameron obviously have the most upside. Cameron's priced at 4.7 though, does have 30 plus fantasy point upside in this matchup. Definitely a GPP look, but not sure I'll get there in my main build. So now I have a 5th running back in Bryson Washington that I got to figure out how to fit into 4 slots. That's what I'll be thinking about the next 36 hours. But you've been pretty good on Baylor. You've hit them a few times on the night slate. I know Hawkins is typically your guy. Do you have a receiver in this room that you might be looking to as a primary main team type play this week or not?
I think Bryson Washington is probably the one that I want to focus on. It is exceedingly difficult to pick the right Baylor receiver. And if you are doing the MME thing, you can do that a little bit more effectively. But as far as a main team goes, I think Bryson Washington or bust.
Yeah, this is a crazy slate because Texas, Clemson, we got all these teams we talked about, Cal, even LSU, now West Virginia, Baylor, like they all have these receivers that are under 5K, and it's like, damn, there's some good spots. Some of these guys are going to pop, but they're so like, roulette wheel-esque with it that you just can't feel comfortable or confident that you're going to land on the right one. It just feels like you're flipping for it. So crazy cheap amount of receivers, playable cheap receivers this week is the main thing, but it's going to be tough to really land on that right combination. I think that's why I'm wanting to pay up at least 1 receiver spot just in case. All right, we're going to move on here. Before we get to core slate breakers, let's talk about some PrizePicks underdog betting opportunities. I have 2 on PrizePicks that I really like. One is Athen Kalikomanis, aka the Greek Rifle, over 201.5 passing yards. He's playing against Maryland, and when a quarterback and a team plays against Maryland, they're going to have success throwing the football. The Greek rifle looked pretty damn good last week, him and Demir Miller, so I think those guys are going to have a big, big game. And then Rocket Sanders, I liked it better 2 weeks ago when we had it at 89.5, but over 108.5 rushing plus receiving yards. Totally revitalized Rocket Sanders, a South Carolina team now that might be able to sneak into the SEC final, depending on how things happen the last couple of weeks. But Rocket is just amazing. He's going to rush for 100 yards, I think, this week. So 108.5 plus rushing plus receiving just feels too good for me. What are some of the PrizePicks underdogs that maybe you are looking at?
So bring it back to kind of the beginning. We were talking about Mekhi Bernard, 78.5 rushing yards, like the over on that quite a bit. Got to go with my boy Caden Durham. They have him at 54.5, and I know he has pass game involvement too, but he could get 55 yards on his first carry and be a pretty easy overs. And I do like taking rushing overs with explosive runners like that. Just love to see that all happen on one play. It's beautiful. And then I don't necessarily want to take a side on this, but I did think it was interesting that there is no prop available for Singleton, and the Allen rushing prop is 73.5, which is a little bit higher than we might typically expect from Kaytron Allen. So maybe Singleton is going to be a little bit more limited, or may not be as available as we think. He is, based on initial reporting. So definitely a situation to keep an eye on with Kaytron Allen, both with regard to the prop as well as DFS lineups.
Yeah, definitely. Couple of bets. BYU -3. BYU spread has been such a money profitable play all year long. They've been like that team of destiny you hinted at earlier. Kind of looked like Miami was that way, but maybe they were the team of the refs because they did finally drop a game. But BYU's found a way to win time and time again. And yes, there was a weird call last week, but -3 at home against Kansas. I got to keep rolling with them. BYU is I just don't know if they're going to lose this game. And Kansas is a team that they're going to be able to do some things. LJ Martin with a big, big game, I feel like, is coming for us. And then I also like Jacksonville State -13 against FIU. Hit on a Trey Stewart 2+ touchdown prop last week. I'm hoping they're going to give that one to us again. He has just been the most amazing find in the transfer portal from a D2 school. Trey Stewart, man, there's a lot of teams wish they had him right now. So -13 Jacksonville State, really like what that team is about. Winning in overtime last week, gutting it out on the back of their stud running back. All right, that is it for PrizePicks props and bets. Brings us to our core play. So what is your 3-man core looking like right now? 2 nights, 2 sleeps before the main slate takes place.
So going to go with Mendoza at quarterback, Caden Durham at running back, and Isaiah Bond at receiver.
Love it. A little tougher for me at quarterbacks, but Mekhi Hughes definitely going to be the core for me there. Ja'Cory Brooks, so 2 higher price looks, and then one of the Florida running backs. And I know I don't usually go cheaper at running back, but probably Jaden Bow there to be continued at quarterback for me. But it'd be one of Riley Leonard or Fernando Mendoza, as you mentioned there. All right, that takes us to the spot that I know we're going to hit this week. I feel very positive. This is a weird lower scoring slate it appears to be, and this is going to be a good one to hit the slate breaker. So who's that going to be this week, and what is that stat line going to be, my friend?
All right, so we are going to go with Caden Durham and a double bonus. So we're going to get 15 carries for 130 yards and a score to go along with 4 catches for 107 yards and a score. So get the 100-yard bonus on both of those and a touchdown, both rushing and receiving. Huge game coming for Caden Durham.
Get him in. I love it. I love that call. This is perfect spot. This is the Felton spot because he's your guy. and has a great matchup, lots of volume. Yeah, gotta be all in here on your dude here, Caden Durham. All right, that will wrap up the show. Appreciate everybody who continues to tune in and support us every single week. Make sure if you're on YouTube currently, you smash that like button, or if you're watching on X/Twitter, you like it and hit the repost/retweet. All of those interactions help us so very much. We'll be back Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock, to answer all Q&A related stuff. FanDuel, DraftKings, PrizePicks, betting, all of it. We'll cover it. There will be content galore over the next 36 hours, main slate breakdown and prop betting piece tomorrow. Saturday afternoon, you can count on Jake for the night slate write-up, which has some nice games on it, and then a ton of projection stuff for college basketball all weekend long, pulling double duty. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Let's get those window trips and green screens. See you guys next week.